In this video, we'll be doing an unsponsored, unbiased review of Tyme Wear's Vitalpro strap, which was just recently released. We'll discuss what the device does, what comes in the box, how to set it up, how to use it, and my overall thoughts. So let's get right into it. The Vitalpro is a wearable chest strap that has an EKG heart rate monitor on the front and a breathing sensor on the back. As far as I'm aware, this device is a first of its kind, a consumer-grade fitness product in the form factor of a standard heart rate monitor that measures your minute ventilation. Minute ventilation is the total volume of airflow breathed in and out during a minute, which can be used to estimate your aerobic and anaerobic thresholds, or in the nomenclature of the 5-zone model, zones 2 and 4, respectively. The primary benefit of measuring your thresholds is to control intensity during endurance-based exercise, so you can target certain physiological adaptations and avoid overtraining. Now, historically, there have been many different methods that have been used for this purpose, including RPE, the talk test, power, heart rate, and blood lactate. Among these, the gold standard historically has been measuring blood lactate, which is a metabolic byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis. However, lactate meters and strips are very expensive, and the testing process is quite invasive. This is why the Vitalpro, at least on paper, is so promising, because studies have shown that for many individuals, breath and lactate are significantly correlated when it comes to your metabolic thresholds. This is because lactate and ventilation levels are both tied to the accumulation of metabolic byproducts produced during anaerobic glycolysis. Generally, in zones 1 and 2, these byproducts remain at or near resting levels because most energy is being produced aerobically. In zones 3 and 4, as the intensity increases, your body requires a quick supply of additional energy, and this is where anaerobic glycolysis really begins to kick in, producing lactate and CO2. But your body is able to clear these byproducts out relatively efficiently, so you can maintain a steady state for moderate durations. However, in zone 5, the metabolic byproducts significantly outpace your ability to clear them and begin to rapidly accumulate, so both your blood lactate and ventilation shoot up exponentially. One thing to be aware of here is that for some, the second ventilatory threshold, or VT2, may occur at a higher intensity compared to the maximum lactate steady state, which is the intensity an athlete can sustain for around 30 to 60 minutes. In contrast, there have been studies which show that athletes can sustain VT2 intensity for around 15 to 40 minutes. That said, anecdotally for some others, the ventilatory and lactate thresholds may occur at around the same intensity. Given this, the important thing to understand is that these thresholds are really just estimates for the point where a person starts to accumulate major physiological stress, and each individual will need to use their own judgment to determine the level of intensity they can consistently sustain and recover from without disrupting their overall training. Now, you may be wondering how a chest strap can determine your oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, and the answer is it can't. But studies have shown that minute ventilation alone can be used to accurately estimate your thresholds based on distinct inflection points in your minute ventilation curve during a ramp test, which we'll discuss later on in the video. I should note that there are other devices out there that can measure your actual breath, but these devices are quite expensive, and let's face it, no one wants to go running around outside looking like Bane.
And we give it back to you, the people.
The strap comes in two parts, one for the heart rate sensor and one for the breathing sensor, and you also get two extenders if you need to add length. I'm 5'10" and around 185 pounds and purchased the regular size and found that I don't need the extenders. The strap uses a unique clasping system that I've never seen before, which I'm guessing was specifically designed to enable a perfect snug fit because the breathing sensor in particular is sensitive to how flush it attaches to your back. More on that later, but in terms of quickly getting the strap on and off, I've had zero problems. Overall, I'd say that the construction of the strap seems to be on par with other high-end Garmin and Polar heart rate monitors I've owned in the past. Also in the box is a setup manual and two standard coin batteries, one for the heart rate sensor and one for the breathing sensor. Also, since the Vitalpro does have some intricate parts, to avoid damage, I bought a hard swim goggles case to keep it in while I'm carrying it around. Setting up the Vitalpro is a relatively straightforward process. You can connect it to your Apple or Android phone and also your Apple or Garmin watch. I won't go into too much detail here because the documentation I think is sufficient, but to connect to your phone, first you need to download the TymeWear app, and then you need to connect both the heart rate sensor and the breath sensor separately via Bluetooth. Personally, I've experienced a few issues with the heart rate sensor in particular, including the sensor dropping out for a few seconds occasionally during a run, and just recently the battery level going to 0 and no longer connecting to the app. The TymeWear team has indicated that this is a software and not a hardware problem, which they're working on, but given these issues, I've been using my old Garmin heart rate sensor on the VitalPro strap. This workaround has been functioning pretty seamlessly, but hopefully this is something TymeWear can resolve soon. To see your breathing stats on your Garmin watch, first you need to download Garmin's Connect IQ app to your phone, and then install the TymeWear app through Connect IQ. After inputting a few settings, you can then add a variety of TymeWear data screens to your workouts. Once you're done connecting everything, the next step is the dreaded ramp test. As of now, TymeWear has ramp tests for cycling and running, and the running one you can perform either on a treadmill or on the track. The default settings for the treadmill test starts you out at 3 miles per hour, and then the speed increases 0.5 miles per hour every 2 minutes. You can modify the duration and speed of each interval, but I just use the default settings since it's the standard protocol for ventilatory ramp tests. Those familiar with lactate ramp tests may be used to longer intervals, anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes, but that's due to the fact that blood lactate takes longer to settle, whereas ventilation settles almost immediately since it's controlled primarily by the brain. One thing that I'd like to see TymeWear add here is the ability to do a constant load test after you've completed your ramp test, similar to the maximum lactate steady state tests where you hone in on your anaerobic threshold by running multiple trials over time around the pace where your ramp test estimated your zone 4 ends. Because both lactate and ventilatory ramp tests are based on approximating inflection points, sometimes the initial readings can be a bit off, especially if the ramp test intervals increase in speed by a significant amount. One very important thing to note is that when you initiate the ramp test, or any workout for that matter, the TymeWear app will tell you if your strap is too loose. As I mentioned earlier, it appears that the breathing sensor is very sensitive to how flush it is on your back, since it measures ventilation by the expansion and contraction of the chest cavity. When I initiated my first ramp test, I was actually using one of the extenders, and the app said that my strap was too loose, so I made it 1 notch tighter, which caused the indicator to hover just above this line. However, after I completed the test, I decided that the strap felt a bit too loose, so I decided to remove the extender, and this completely changed my breathing metrics. I did a very slow 1-hour run the next day, and although my heart rate said that I was mostly in zone 1, the TymeWear app showed that nearly the entire run was done in zones 4 and 5. So I performed another ramp test 2 days later, which produced very different ventilatory measurements for my various zones. Given these discrepancies, my recommendation would be to do at least one workout before conducting a ramp test to try out different lengths on the strap to ensure you're getting as snug of a fit as you can comfortably tolerate. After you've completed your ramp test, the data is then sent to the TymeWear team, and it takes around 24 hours to get your results back. I'd be interested to know what happens to the data at this point, but presumably they do some sort of manual analysis. The data you get back includes your VO2 max and your minute ventilation, heart rate, and pace for each of your zones 2 to 5. And this is the key defining feature of the VitalPro. It assesses your aerobic and anaerobic thresholds based on your specific physiology, instead of estimating them based on a generic formula. Prior to using the VitalPro, I used the lactate threshold heart rate calculated by my Garmin, and this put the top end of my zone 2 around the mid to low 140s. But this number wasn't based on my Garmin independently testing my aerobic threshold. Instead, it was based on simply taking a percentage of its estimate of my lactate threshold heart rate. The reality is that your physiology doesn't function based on a formula. So for example, in my case, from my ramp test, the TymeWear app shows that my zones 3 and 4 are above range relative to my VO2 max, whereas my zone 2 is at the lower end of being within range with some room for improvement. And this appears to be accurate based on my recent training. I only recently started to take running seriously, and prior to that, I was doing CrossFit, which typically focuses much more on metcons that usually push you into zones 4 and 5 with very limited zone Zone 2 work. So all this time I had been using my Garmin to control intensity, virtually every single one of my so-called easy runs were actually tempo. I was racking up to 40 plus miles a week without doing any Zone 2. And this may explain why, after decades of training without any serious injuries, in July I suffered a calf strain that forced me to stop working out for the first time in my life. But now with the Vitalpro, instead of using a cookie cutter program based on a generic formula applied to my heart rate or age, I can tailor my programming to attack my unique weaknesses based on my actual physiology. And if you don't want to do your own programming, the TymeWear app will give you recommendations for weekly and daily training to address your weaknesses. So when you're ready to do a workout, there are two different ways to record it, either by starting the workout on the TymeWear app or on your watch. During a workout, the Vitalpro will send various metrics to the TymeWear app and or your watch, including your heart rate, breath rate, your instantaneous minute ventilation, and your average minute ventilation over a certain period of time. Your watch can also change colors based on which zone you're presently in, which is very handy when you just want to take a quick look at your watch without getting bogged down by all the numbers. One thing to note is that the minute ventilation numbers will fluctuate pretty significantly during your workout, which sometimes will cause the data to spike or drop for short periods of time. This is common for any ventilatory measurements, including those recorded by lab-graded metabolic carts, because your breath can be affected by things like coughing, sighing, or swallowing. Although technically minute ventilation is defined as total airflow over a minute, in practice this number is calculated continuously based on your last few breaths. Given this, during a workout, I find that it's best not to get too focused on the second-by-second fluctuations, and instead it's better to take note of your overall minute ventilation trend. After your workout is complete, there are a variety of different ways to analyze your data. In the TymeWear phone app, you can see how much time you spent in each zone. Garmin Connect will also show various respiratory data for each workout. And there's a web-based page where you can break down and analyze your data using customizable charts. So for example, here's my data for an easy run I did recently after a long strength session. One thing you can notice right away is that while my heart rate trended up during the run, my minute ventilation trended down. And this minute ventilation curve was much more in line with how I actually felt after a tough strength session. My CNS was fatigued, my glycogen levels likely depleted, and undoubtedly I was experiencing a surge of inflammation to repair the damage done from lifting. So right when I started my run, my minute ventilation was telling me I was in zones 3 and 4, whereas my heart rate was telling me I was in zone 1. And so I adjusted my speed to slow down a bit, and then felt much better by the end of the run. This is something that I would have never done prior to using the Vitalpro. But I have a tendency to always want to go full throttle during training. So prior to using the Vitalpro, even though I was following a typical running program that constrained me to various heart rate zones, I would always push to the top of the prescribed zone. If I had an easy zone 2 run planned for the day, I would press right up to and sometimes above the designated heart rate. But I've learned the hard way that this isn't the smart way to train when it comes to running. So for me, switching from heart rate to minute ventilation to control intensity has been a game changer. It gives me an objective, physiological excuse to throttle back, which is huge for someone that tends to bang their head against the wall unless I have bright line parameters to keep me in check. And in my opinion, this single change alone has made buying the Vitalpro worth it. Yes, it is expensive, and yes, there are a number of annoying bugs that I and some others have experienced. But as someone that's a tech nerd that's been an early adopter on many different products, the litmus test that I personally use to gauge a new product isn't whether the product is perfect, but rather whether the product with its flaws is at least marginally better than the current alternatives. And after using the Vitalpro for about a month, I can honestly say that the answer for me so far is yes. I'm back to the mileage and workout paces I peaked at prior to my injury, but having significantly slowed down my easy runs, my cumulative load is much lower. Now the ultimate test, of course, is whether my fitness will improve in the long run, and that's what I intend to find out, which I will document in future videos.